Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann is a show that I've been trying to watch for a pretty good while now, at least a few years, because the aesthetic and vibe of it all seem really attractive and appealing to me, and I'm a sucker for really hype battles and moments and action stories. And that's what people keep always telling me about the show. Oh, it's insane, over-the-top hype, you're gonna love it. However, this explanation always felt a little bit reductionist of what the show is and could be, even from the outside looking in. While I love some good old over-the-top hype, I also very much adore stories with deeper characterization and themes that have a little bit more to chew on beyond just some flashy action. Most of my favorite stories are the ones that are able to mix up both of these elements in a way that's coherent and interesting. Just look at my literal favorite game of all time, Xenoblade Chronicles 2. That has some of the craziest action out there, but it's also really insightful and philosophical and has some pretty deep characters. And when I tried starting Gurren Lagann in the past, I always felt like that initial description was a bit true, in the sense that, like, okay, I was enjoying it, but the pacing was insanely fast, and while the show was fun, it felt like a lot of it was sort of shallow. Kami, who's pretty much one of the main characters and the driving force for the plot moving forward in the first few episodes, sort of comes across as more dumb and reckless than actually motivational. And just in general, the tone and comedy all felt a little bit flimsy, like the story wanted to get to one point to another really fast. From the first episode, we go from the underground, and then we're already at Yoko's village, and then from there we're already going forward to try and find the bad guys. So the story keeps moving really fast early on, and I feel like there's not enough time to properly set a mood or give the tone any sort of lasting weight initially, which is partially why the show did not really have me hooked for my first few attempts at watching it. Back when I was a kid, I always looked at the cover, I always looked at the few clips of the action scenes, and I was like, okay, this looks awesome, I need to watch this. And then I watched the first episode, I was like, okay, this is cool, I guess. But it didn't really catch me, it didn't really grip me. But recently, I managed to sit down, get the hang of it, and keep watching. Pretty much based on a friend's recommendation who said, like, okay, this show is really your type of thing, just sit down, you really like it, trust. And I trusted. Plus, again, all that I had seen did really look super cool. I have loved media almost purely on hype alone before. Just look at, I don't know, Metal Gear Rising. For a 7-hour long game with a little bit of political mumbo jumbo, the best and most exciting things about it are the over-the-top quick time events and music. Or even something like Dragon Ball, which I always come back to on this channel for some reason. I'd still argue that has a lot of substance hidden in between the lines too, in the characterization, but like, I'd be lying if I said the major appeal of, at the very least early Dragon Ball, wasn't how the comedy in the lighter moments actually fed into my enjoyment of the characters and the story, to a point where I was invested not purely through drama, but also comedy and how the characters were endearing. Plus, amidst the distracting tonal inconsistency and very fast pace, there was still a pretty enjoyable show here. For the first 8 episodes of Gurren Lagann, it keeps switching back and forth between having some really light, sort of, okay, is this necessary moments, and some really neat and interesting stuff. The episode where they go to that underground village with the religious sort of organization going on, where they have few resources. So this priest sort of dude, he comes in and he's like organizing the village by the amount of people that are alive. If the population exceeds a certain number, they have to send them away to the dangerous outside world. That's some really cool, interesting stuff, and that managed to, on top of the really fun characters, get me hooked. But it's in episode 8 where Gurren Lagann really becomes something extraordinary. So if you guys don't know, it's in episode 8, spoiler warning, where Kamina freaking dies, and the story takes pretty much a completely new direction. I would argue it's something similar to how Madoka Magica does it by its third episode, even though people don't talk about it as much, and it's of course a lot more subtle, with the goal and theming of the show staying more or less the same. That was a moment where the artificial safety that was in the story through, you know, the tone and the general vibes that it was going for early on were completely dismantled, where we realized, okay, no characters can die, a main character can die, and like he doesn't come back, he really doesn't come back, that's it, Kamina's gone. It really is a pulling the rug out all at once sort of twist that changes the story tone permanently. It's a very interesting case of Cerberus syndrome that for whatever reason doesn't seem to be that well recognized as such. In my video on Cerberus syndrome, I explored a few cases of it, but none quite like this one. Because this was, of course, very intentional, it was harsh, it was quick, everything is going A-okay, then boom, main character dies. It takes quite a handful of episodes to get there, but not like too many. It's less than 10 episodes, more than 3. It's a very particular case. Again, I would compare it maybe to Madoka Magica, but whereas that is very explicitly meant to be a genre switch, pretty much. You thought this was a cute show? Nah, you're wrong. Gurren Lagann does this, but it's not like the complete setting and message of the story change. No, they just get challenged, and that's what really interesting about it. From there on, I was absolutely enthralled by the show, just episode after episode after episode, sitting there in front of the screen being immersed in the story, just going crazy for it. It was so good. Simon's arc, as he overcomes his grief of losing Kamina, is pretty damn amazing, and kudos to the writing team for making an insecure character who doesn't fall into the stereotype of being the typical socially anxious, overly quiet, overly shy type of character. I feel like we need more characters who are genuinely heroic and cool, like deep down, but just have trouble expressing that, over characters whose entire personality are defined by how they are shy, awkward, and insecure. It's the difference between Simon and someone like Shinji from Evangelion. And right after Kamina's death, we get the introduction of Mia, who's just so perfect. Not gonna go too crazy over it because it's mostly just a personal thing, but I absolutely love her as a character. She's so huggable, she's so adorable, and her relationship with Simon is so nice to watch. She's great. I love Mia. And of course, as Simon starts to, you know, re-stabilize as far as coming to terms with Kamina's death, the show's theme also stabilizes and things start getting a little bit more exciting and optimistic again. We even got a whole ass beach episode just because. But I was still loving it because that's where the genius of the story lies. Because yes, after Kamina's death, the tone of the story does change permanently. Again, it's surprising more people don't talk about it. I feel like when everyone talks about Gurren Lagann, they're always talking about how hype and optimistic it is, if a bit shallow, not realizing that there's this very specific point where the show goes, got you, this is gonna be deeper than you thought. Like freaking post-time skip, Rossio attempts freaking suicide. And Rossio as a whole really is a character that really represents how the show changes into something a little bit more insightful and deep and multifaceted. His whole deal is being a more rational and resourceful character than someone like Simon, and he uses his political power after the time skip to do some pretty questionable stuff in the name of protecting humanity, and it's really interesting to watch. Some people say that part is boring, but bro, that's some of the more interesting parts in the entire story. He really is the phase Xenogears of Gurren Lagann. But despite all of that, the show still remains optimistic in its overall message. Kamina's death doesn't simply work as a door for the messed up stuff that the story starts introducing after it, but as a motivator for the characters. It's a hard balance to pull off, but Gurren Lagann threads the line between depressing and idealistic in a way that you don't usually see in stories. In essence, it evolves from simply never give up in the face of danger to... hold up, I wrote this down. Here it is. Living hurts badly sometimes. Life can often feel like it's taking everything away from you. People can die, people fail continuously. People will spout platitudes about freedom and never giving up and then die in the battlefield minutes later. And yet, you must never fall into despair and lose hope, for the biggest fool is the one who chooses comfortable defeat over an unlikely victory. The biggest fool is the one who looks at a universe where something as miraculous as human life exists and still doesn't believe in miracles. For we, human beings, have pushed our way through war and despair and come out the other way more advanced, more knowledgeable, kinder, because inside even the greediest of human beings is a soul that is as capable of love as it is of hate. It's only through understanding that duality that one is able to find the truth. We're stupid little creatures that don't know when to stop. But that isn't a problem. That's the power that allows us to evolve past our previously established limits, even when the situation seems the most dire. For simply moving forward is the least we can do in the face of impossible odds. And even if we fail, we can still be the key for whoever comes after us to achieve a better tomorrow. In other words, if life gives you lemons, you destroy them with a giant freaking drill. Basically what Gurren Lagann does is explore a more nuanced take on the whole never giving up message that we've seen forever in these kinds of stories. As its characters evolve, the themes evolve too, while still remaining the same core ideal. While the circumstances change and get constantly darker, the characters never fully give up, and they're at the rock bottom when they're thinking of giving up or choosing the easiest, safest solution. Speaking of evolving, we need to talk about spiral power, which basically is the quote-unquote magic system in Gurren Lagann's universe, but it's a little bit more abstract than that. It basically represents human determination, or as they call it in the story, fighting spirit, and it can fuel the big robots and whatnot, but it's really not that tangible. It's supposed to be more of a representation of that human drive to never give up and keep evolving. And while the whole message still ends up being never give up, we humans have the power to use quote-unquote spiral energy to push through impossible odds. Even the story points out the issues with that. The main bad guy, the anti-spiral, which is the sort of race of alien beings that rejected spiral energy, they believe that potential overuse of spiral energy could likely bring an end to the entire universe, that thing they call spiral nemesis. And I feel like that basically represents how, even though we as humans have that power to keep evolving in the face of every threat that comes our way, that power has to be used wisely. Basically, I feel like at the end of the day, the show advocates for balance. By the end, Simon accepts that Nia dies. After the final last episode time skip, he just becomes a wandering digger. He doesn't bask in his glory or continues being the politician that he was assigned to be during the main time skip. He lives out a humble life, understanding the limitations of death in life and being human without going overboard with what you can do. Even when Kamina dies, he first starts feeling terrible because he feels like he has to take up the mantle of his bro by being like him. But in that arc, he finds his purpose not by being Kamina, but by being himself and relying on his own strengths, things Kamina could have never done. After all, even if Kamina was the major instigator for the entire good guy rebellion in the show, he still died being reckless. And while, yeah, he got a city named after him, and I wouldn't even argue that the show argues he was a bad guy or he was wrong, he still failed. He went overboard, he was reckless. Meanwhile, Simon finds the truth in being himself. He's no politician, he's no big name hero. He's just a guy who wants to help out. Even Yoko ultimately decides to become a teacher for little kids while carrying a different identity, because that's what brings fulfillment ultimately. It's not greatness, it's doing your part and doing your best to make the world a better place for everyone around you. And where am I getting with this? Well, I would argue that we all have spiral power, in a sense. not literally. The magical pseudoscience concept that is in the show doesn't actually exist. But spiral power really represents human determination. Again, as the show keeps saying, see the invisible, do the impossible, row, fight the power. Basically, as I said earlier, spiral power represents our drive to keep going and going and going, even if the situation seems dire and we feel like we can't do anything about it. And I would argue that even in real life, that's a real human trait. That's what allows us to come from stupid little caveman to where we are today, for better or worse. We humans have evolved and we are able now to create art. We're able now to save lives. We have medicine, we have technology. That also brought some bad, but that also is the reason why I'm able to be here making this very video for you guys over the internet. And be it doctors, athletes, scholars, or simply good friends, or even diggers. A little bit of that spiral power is within every single one of you. That power to keep going and to motivate the people around us to keep going. We might not all be able to save the universe, but we can do it like Kamina and inspire someone else to make great change. Through generating hope, even on a smaller scale, we can end up causing great things down the line. Just being ourselves and doing what we're best at. It's like a spiral. One single little action leads into more actions, which leads into more actions and more actions and more actions. And now that little small picture thing, that little dot in the middle, becomes this huge spiral of facts. And that's the power of hope. That's the power of those little good deeds. The risk of sounding cheesy and generic, good actions generate more good actions. We don't know the future, but it's only by taking action now, however we can, that we can achieve a future closer to what we desire. And if more problems come, then we'll deal with them the same way. That's ultimately what Simon argues against the threat of the spiral nemesis, is by saying, we've come so far, who's to say we'll not be able to go further and overcome even those threats when they come? Because we humans, we're dang special. Thanks for watching, everyone. See y'all next time.